Tonight, tonight we will be discussing how to reduce bias and improve cultural competence. What I would like everyone to do, if possible, is to please remember to mute yourselves. And in the case that you would like to pose a question, a comment, or a concern, you are able to do so by inputting it either into the chat box, or you can simply unmute yourself at the time and pose that question, comment, or concern. We will hopefully end at 8 p.m. It may run a little bit over, which is fine. And again, thank you for everyone coming and joining us tonight. We plan to have a very open and honest dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. I think I'll kick it off. And you know, tonight's topic is obviously, as the other topics that we've worked on, is tremendously important. And I think obviously from our perspective, it's how do we approach increasing cultural competence and reducing bias. And I've said it a number of times on these conversations, and we'll continue to do that. And it's why we have these conversations, is that, you know, one of the ways to reduce bias is just simply developing relationships amongst people. And when you develop relationships amongst people, you reduce bias, and it takes away question marks that people have about other people. Obviously, with the pandemic, it's been very difficult for us to get together. And when Tim and I first started talking about this, we said that, you know, and this was prior to the pandemic, we wanted to have these live and in person, where we all could get together and sit around and have conversation. And sometimes the conversations would be uncomfortable, probably. But at least we were able to see and be with each other in the same room or wherever that may be. And I think that helps a lot. And when I say that, I think it reduces bias from both sides. You know, if the community has a bias against the police department, I think by getting to know us, getting to know what we're about, who we are, and why we do what we do, it reduces that bias. But it certainly doesn't take into consideration cultural competence and building the cultural competence of our police department. And I think first and foremost, the way we do that, and our most effective way we do that, is through our training. And that's why we have tonight Commander Cole and Prosecutor Keller on here, because and Randy and John, you'll have to help me out, but I want to say at least 10 years, they have undertaken that very large task of training our police department and helping our officers and our entire police department develop cultural competence. With that being said, I'm a true believer, and I know that Prosecutor Keller has probably gotten sick of me saying this to him, but I think to develop cultural competence amongst our officers or in any segment of society, you have to understand history. And I believe, and I've said that before on these conversations, I believe that is where the disconnect consistently happens, because we do a poor job, and I'll just say a society, of teaching history to people, to our kids, and it goes on and on and on. And when we're talking about cultural competence and cultural competence of the African American community, there's a severe lack of understanding of history. And so one of the ways that I tried to assist that in one of Prosecutor Keller's training classes is, and I've said this before also, is that we had all our officers watch the documentary 13, and it's about the 13th Amendment. And whether you agree with what's in the documentary or whether you don't agree with what's on the documentary, they give you history. They talk about history. And you'll see people in those classes that they'll be like, I really didn't know that. I had no idea. And I think once we continue, or not once but if we continue to teach history, it goes a long way in understanding cultural competence. And I'm gonna stop talking here, and I'm gonna let John and Randy talk about the training that they've given us. But I want to say one other thing is that last month I went through a training with the other directors in Shaker Heights, and it was the training was provided by the Racial Equity Institute, and they call it the groundwater approach. And I found that training so compelling and so well done that we're at this point in time, our entire supervisory staff and command staff is going to go through that same training. And groundwater is essentially a metaphor to help people understand what they're trying to get across, and that we live in a racially structured society, and racial inequity looks the same across systems. And racial inequity is caused by the systems, and it's regardless of people's culture or behavior. It was some of the best training I've ever had. I want to say kudos to Sandy Middleton, our human resource director, and Jerry Jakin, our CAO, because they were really the impetus in bringing this in. And it's just phenomenal. And like I said, it's compelling, and it is a little expensive to get everybody through it, but what it does, it provides history, and it provides factual data in regards to systemic racism and how it occurs and how it's occurring today. So I'll be quiet at this point in time, but I think to kick it off, and John and Randy, I don't know who wants to go first, is the important part of what we do and how we, again, develop cultural competence and reduce bias is it starts with training. And then we have to follow up that training, and we in a live environment, we have to, through body-worn camera or on scene with supervisors, we have to see how our officers are responding to the training that has been given to them. So that's as far as much as I'd like to say at this point in time. And Randy, if you want to kick it off, if that's okay, John, with you, we'll go with Randy.
Sure. Thank you, and good evening to everyone. I also at this point think it's real important to say thank you to all of those principals in S.A.M.S that has the ability and the desire and the effort to bring folks together to continue these very, very important discussions. So thank you very much. I don't consider it at all anything but a privilege to be here at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening to talk about these very, very important and ongoing issues. So when I was thinking about, what would I like to say and how would I like to capsulize it and what's important in the context of how we have trained and how we kind of bit off this very, very big project. And the chief is right. It's been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to 12 years, give or take. I thought that with my time in the introductory comments, it would be insightful for me to just give you a little snapshot of the evolution of the training and some of the things that have come to bear that we've had to deal with and we've had to adjust to and change and modify in order to make sure that we are doing a service not just to the officers, but attempting to improve community and policing relationships. So, some 10 to 12 years ago, we started out thinking that if we talked about the evolution of the case law, and if we talked about civil rights cases and what happened in the federal courts throughout the country in the context of police misconduct lawsuits, that would be good training. It would be good risk management. It's something that would be engaging to the officers because they would then better understand what it is that gets them, if you will, into difficult situations and get sued and maybe even lose their jobs and all of the things that goes along with that. So that was our initial approach to trying to train our officers. And so what we found with that in-depth analysis is that, it was interesting and all of that, but there was a byproduct, and the byproduct was that we had to, the commander and I had to come up with a way to better understand our audience, because while we were giving them the information and we were giving them kind of the black letter rules of this is what you should do, this is what gets you, into difficulties along the way, we weren't really being interactive and engaging and forcing everyone in the room to further think through some very, very complicated and difficult scenarios. So we had to try to figure out, how do we get individuals to better understand the varying perspectives on these very complicated and sensitive and incendiary at times issues. And so that was kind of the next step in the evolution of the training was, how do we come to a point where we are really, really engaging them in the context of the framework that we had given them in the earlier years. So, how do you better engage varying individuals and varying viewpoints? Because, everybody's obviously not the same. So when we arrived at that juncture, what we began to do was create simulation exercises and opportunities to put individuals into perspectives and positions that they may not ordinarily find themselves in. So, if I create a scenario training where you are now the union president and the union supervisor, but you're not the officer, what does that mean in the context of the union's interests versus the individual officer's interests? Or we would put, a caucus of folks, if we had, because we do it in groups, if we had 18 people, we would break them up 6, 6, and 6 and say, okay, you 6 individuals are now responsible for the position of the NAACP or some other civil rights advocacy organization. So we did that for a few years and we found that actually to be very, very successful because it forced folks to start thinking about perspectives that they may not have otherwise contemplated in very, very difficult circumstances. And so that was very, very good. And a couple of the tools that we used, Jeff mentioned 13th. We showed 13th, and then we had breakout groups, and we tried to make sure that varying perspectives were advocated. And how do you advocate those? What are the thoughts? What are the concerns? So, if I'm not walking in those shoes every day, there's a lot of benefit to me having to take a step back and begin to think about, what is that perspective or what is that mindset? So that was a very, very insightful part of the evolution of our training paradigm. And that's kind of where we are today, quite frankly, is that we've had a few years where we have really tried hard to get everybody to think about competing viewpoints and competing perspectives and garner the value of those exercises. One other one that comes to mind is we put together, and I'm very proud of this particular one. I'm proud of all of the training, but one of the things we did was we got together a civil rights defense attorney. We got together a municipal and police defense attorney, myself, Commander Cole, and we actually videotaped about a 2-hour panel discussion on how the issues of police misconduct, bias, civil rights litigation, all of those things came to fore. And we raised issues and we had this dialogue. And I will say to you that, we could, if anyone is interested, we still have that video and we can certainly make it available to you for you to watch. But again, it was an effort to try to put people in positions, and albeit sometimes uncomfortable, where they had to contemplate the viewpoint of the other perspective. And the rounding kind of third and heading home here, because I want to give the commander some time. So what I am concerned about now and what I'm focused on is we have had a year of pandemic where everyone has been somewhat isolated and totally isolated in a lot of instances. And I should have just said totally, because we're now reaching the point where it's, we're kind of coming out of it, hopefully with the vaccinations and everything that's going on. But the truth of the matter is the environment has become more volatile, I think. I think that's for a lot of different reasons. I think people are penned up, they're aggravated, they're frustrated. I think, and this is my own perspective, that we have seen a bully pulpit over a 4-year period of time that flamed the stokes of divisiveness, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's not a value judgment, it's just a fact. And so we now find ourselves in this position coming out of this. How do we effectively train in what is a very, very different environment than anything that we've experienced up to this point in time? And one of the challenges is that we have, and the chief and I talk about this a lot, we have, and I mean this in the most generic sense of the word, there is an ignorance factor. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the average individual who's walking out there, and let's take the police officer first, I'm concerned about my kids being homeschooled. I'm concerned about working a couple extra shifts to make some more money. I got 2 kids in college. I'm trying to do all of the things that are necessary. Maybe my wife has been laid off, or whatever the case may be. That particular ignorance to the history that the chief spoke of is not necessarily motivated by some malcontent or some bad intentions or some prejudicial intentions in every case, but it's just motivated or it's a byproduct of just day-to-day living and trying to make it all work. So if I say to that officer, hey, are you familiar with what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge? Or are you familiar with the history of African Americans in this country? It may not necessarily be an intentional ignorance. It might just be that I'm so inundated with so many things that are going on as a result of the last 12 months that it's just not something that I have had an opportunity to explore or to look at. And obviously the converse of that is also true. So going forward, one of the challenges that we're going to face is, how do we meaningfully and effectively commence training again in the backdrop of all of those things? A volatile environment, a situation where people have been very, very focused on their own concerns and their own well-being. And so I don't necessarily have the time to explore these other things, not because I don't want to, but because I don't have the time. So when we get that captive audience for that 8-hour day or whatever else it may be, we have to be very, very mindful of how to get the essence out of that training. And the same thing goes for the community at large. We have to figure out in forums like this one and other forums that we've tried to create, how do we deal with that same, and in the generic sense, please don't misunderstand me, anybody, that ignorance of the other side of the coin. How do we go out into the community when we've got, 30 young people who have struggled through virtual learning and all the other challenges? They are preoccupied with those things. So how do we begin to once again make this relationship and the dynamics meaningful and insightful? So I think the evolution is where I'm focused at this point in terms of training going forward. That's a little bit about what we have tried to do to this point. Commander?
Excuse me, Commander, before you chime in, I do want to make note of the time. It is now 7:26. We would like to hear very much what you have to say, but we would also like to leave 15 to 20 minutes for questions. Also, it has been asked, extensive comment was made on the training or teaching of history, and inquiring minds want to know history from whose perspective. There are two, and perhaps Commander, you can speak to that. I will give you the floor now, and if you can address those questions, we'd appreciate it.
And I'm sorry for having such a big mouth.
It's good to hear from you always.
No, Chief Keller did a wonderful job explaining how our training evolved. And looking at the perspective, we started off with the perspective of the officer, what they could do, what they couldn't do, and evolving it through. We wanted to put the officers in the shoes of the people that they are committed to serving. It was really easy here because our directives just made it flow with our racial profiling statement so that they knew where our management stood. And Chief Keller and I really endeavored to make sure that they understood that there's certain things that we were going to tolerate, certain things we were not. And looking at the perspective of where we were at and where we wanted to go to get them to understand mindfulness, to get them to understand perspective. And then I believe the chief would agree with me, we went from that lecture where no one said anything to the officers actually taking over and saying, I never even considered that. And putting them in the shoes of someone else, someone that they had never met, someone that they didn't really understand. We really brought that training to life. And then to evolve it with bringing in some of the community members, because Chief Keller didn't get a chance to tell you that we started bringing in some of the students, and they were relaying how they interacted with police or what their perception was. And I know just from my own perception, growing up in a predominantly white community and being fearful of the police, and then having the police actually work with me, come to our basketball games at night and pick up the ball. It was really just interesting to see the evolution and how we were going to do it. I share the same concerns that Chief Keller does after a year of being off, because we had our workforce that was understanding. And the good thing about us is that our doors are open. So when the officers came in and they had a question, and anyone who will tell you anything about me, I'm kind of anal retentive, neurotic compulsive. So I like to read everything. And we like to share with those officers, what was going on? Why did you do what you did? And we keep evolving that training. So the perspective, getting back to that question, the perspective not only of the officer, but we want to take the perspective of the individual who are out there. And that's my family, that's your family, and getting those, because we've all gone to dinner parties and we've had that discussion on what the police just did and how should I have reacted. So we were able to incorporate all that and given a latitude by our command staff to make sure that happened.
Can I, real quick about that question, history from whose perspective? I think that question is extremely insightful because history is factual. What happened, happened. And so the challenge becomes, how do you draw out of both community partners and police officers their varying perspectives on that factual history? And so, you know, we're not in those situations a lot of times advocating for one perspective or the other, because what happened happened. There's no disputing that law enforcement's history with the minority community has not been a good one. That's not in dispute. So, you know, when you say from whose perspective, I think the question becomes insightful as part of the challenge, because we have, you know, situations where people want to say, hey, you're not advocating this particular perspective enough. You're advocating the other perspective enough. And the only way to combat that is to put people in situations where they have to advocate for something that they may not be comfortable discussing or gaining an understanding of.
And that's a fair statement, but my comment to that then would be, if you put them in those situations, what do you do or what do you say to encourage people to speak up on those things? Because a lot of people will have their own thoughts and opinions, but they're not willing to share them, and we've got to get them past that point. So how would you get them to open up and share what their thoughts and opinions are on one perspective versus the other? Because like you said, that's how the dialogue is going to take place.
Well, Chief, you want to go?
Yeah, Deirdre, I'll answer what you asked. And I was just going to follow up in regards to what Randy said is that the facts are the facts, history is a history. And one of the telling reasons why we had everybody watch that documentary is the director is Ava DuVernay. Everybody knows who Ava is, African-American female. It is presented from her perspective, but with real facts. And in addition to, and you've heard Randy talk about this before, is that, and maybe this will answer your question, Deirdre, is we want to always provide a safe space for open dialogue. Are we always successful at that? Maybe, maybe not. But I will tell you, since I've been chief, we have had a ton of people come in and talk to us about a bevy of things that have bothered them. And what we've always, in the end, what we found is that we reached a common ground in regards to, well, I never understood why you felt that way, meaning as a police officer. And then the residents or the community members that came in would also say, well, I really never understood why you did this as a police officer. So I think we can't make people talk to us. We can't make people share their inner thoughts or feelings if they don't want to. But the only way we can do that is to provide and make them feel like there's they have a safe space with the police department. And I know that's a really, really, really sheer hill to climb. I get that. I think we all get that. But that's all we can do. And let people know that, yeah, we're listening. And Commander Masnaro is on this call, and Commander Cole will testify to the fact that we spent 4.5 hours, I think it was 4.5 hours with a couple in regards to a traffic stop one night, just hashing out some of the most minute details of what we do and the minute details of why this couple felt the way they did. It was a long time, and it took a lot of energy, but how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. I think that's the only way, Deirdre. I don't know if I'm answering that question the way you want me to, but I think that's the only way we can do it. And that was the underlying reason for these conversations, is that we can get together and just talk. We might not agree with everything each other says. We might in fact say, no, you're absolutely wrong. But to provide a safe space for everybody to air their opinions and their feelings and their perceptions.
Okay, so then let's do that. Let's just talk, because like you said, it's about perspective. 13 was based on Ava DuVernay's perspective. Now, I am of a certain age, and I can tell you that I have been taught history, as many of us have. And even in the teaching and the learning of the history, we still have our own perception of what that history was. We can look at the same facts and we all still have different feelings about it. And that's good. What the conversation is based on the facts, based on the perceptions, personal and implied, creating a safe space. Let's have that dialogue. You know, at what level of competency, what level of understanding are we bringing to the table to make this better? And no, we can't make people talk, but we can certainly encourage them to feel comfortable in that. And that is what I want to do tonight. I want our guests to feel comfortable. Mr. Hicks, Mr. McIntyre, Jerry, Mr. Sabino. Let's have a conversation with the chief and the commanders on the bias and the competency. No takers, come on, guys, help me out here. They've laid it out. They've shown us what they've done, and we appreciate the efforts. But I mean, now is the time where we get to talk about it. Let's have that discussion. If you don't have a comment, do you have a question?
Well, I'll jump in. I guess from the meetings that I attended, and I really, really appreciated the meeting that the chief attended along with his other officers, Sergeant Griffin and Lieutenant Lemieux, as far as talking to our Woodbury sixth graders. I think you shared a very honest perspective. I think the kids really appreciated that you reached out to them and that you talked to them, and actually you were speaking to them on their level. I have nothing but positives about this. I think things have to start somewhere. I have lived in Cleveland Heights, East Cleveland, and Shaker, and Aurora in my lifetime, and this is the first time that I have seen the police department here in Shaker or anywhere else I've lived as an adult, whereas you really are trying or making a platform available for everyone to talk. I wish we would give more participants. I constantly sent out, I think I sent 40 emails out today to try to remind our community to attend this meeting. But I have nothing but positives about this. I think it's a good start. And I think you've been very transparent in your conversations. But that's just from my perspective.
Deirdre, one of the things I'd like to say before anybody jumps in there is that I think, you know, let's be honest. I'm a white male. I don't know what it's like to grow up as an African-American male or an African-American female. And I think when we first started talking about all this, Kim and I think, I don't know if I put it this way, but I said, listen, I need help. I need direction. You know, I need, you know, the community to come and go arm in arm, hand in hand with me and say, Jeff, this is where you need to take this. This is what needs to be done. This, you know, and I think, you know, I'm man enough to admit that, you know, I certainly don't know a lot. I rely upon, you know, my confidant, Randy there, and John. But I'm here to tell you, you know, we're trying. And like Mr. Hicks said, we're trying as hard as we can, but we do need the community's help to kind of direct us and lead us towards a more effective way of coming together and talking about these things.
All right, everyone, there was your invitation from Chief DeMuth to ask the questions. And if you're too shy and don't want to ask it, I'm not shy at all. So just put it in the text box and I'll ask it for you.
You know, I just wanted to make a comment and thank you so much for Dee Dee for setting it up where it's very clear that we want an exchange and a conversation. It's funny because a lot of times after our finding common ground conversations, I'll get text or maybe like emails the next day with some very valid points and great comments that weren't spoken during the call. And, you know, I guess it's a matter of what the involvement looks like. I really think that for some people, just to accept the invitation to have a discussion with the police officers is a big step. And while my level of involvement looks one way, another person's level of involvement and their takeaway looks like it needs to look for them. So I don't want anybody to feel pressured to lift their voice during this conversation. But at the same time, everything that's come my way after these conversations have been valid and just right on point. So if you're thinking of a question, thinking of a comment, it's totally fine to voice it here. That's why we're in this space. And again, it's just small steps. These small steps will come together. So I'll get off, but I just wanted to say that I know who you are, the people who reach out to me, and I'm just hoping that we can have this exchange during these calls.
Mr. McIntyre, can I put you on the spot and ask for your thoughts?
We had a meeting with the MAC scholars earlier in the week, and I also met with my middle school scholars, and we were talking about, well, I asked them a question in terms of what they felt would be some things that the Shaker Heights Police Department could do, the community could do to also working together to basically just create a greater understanding, right? And one of the things that a number of the kids had mentioned is that, first of all, they hadn't really had any negative encounters with the Shaker Heights Police Department. They have always found that, you know, the interaction that they had, whether it be through the school, was positive. And just like Mr. Hicks has said, they had either attended the sessions that we set up for the scholars, the potential scholars at the high school or the middle school. But I know in our meeting with the high school guys, a couple of suggestions came up, and I'm going to share those. And I think we've talked about them a little bit that I thought might be a good idea. I'm not sure of what the data says pertaining to what situations in Shaker are the dominant situations that involve police and community interaction. All right, like for example, I know sometimes there's interaction with the Shaker Heights Police Department, maybe at the public library because of some things that are going on there. There might be situations that are going on in the neighborhood that involve the students to interact with the police. If we was gonna, you know, data says the top 5 situations are, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know what those are. But the kids said, you know, if you could reenact those situations and use them as discussion stimulators. In other words, situations that either the kids have seen, they recognize, hey, yeah, I was there. I told my parents about it. They said something about it. But that can be sort of like the moment to start the dialogue. You know, we have this reenactment. All right, freeze frame. What are you feeling about what you just saw? What do you think happened here? What do you think could be done? What do you think shouldn't have been done? All right, you know, it allows people to sort of reenact the moment. Like even the example that Chief DeMuth, you mentioned pertaining to a 4-hour dialogue pertaining to his traffic stop. Okay, now how many of us have been in a traffic stop? How many of us have been in a situation where there was a dialogue? Where does that fall in regards to similarities or situational kinds of things that you as officers actually face? Is that the number one with students, traffic stops? Or is it number two or number four? All right. What is the number one situation involving kids? The reason I'm emphasizing the kids is because number one, just like with the scholars, you know, they're everywhere in the community. They're in the stores. They either see the teachers in the store, they see the officers in the store, at the game. You know, where do our students see us in this community? Because the only time, if like I live in Shaker, so, and many of you live in Shaker, so we see the kids all the time in different situations. I've seen the kids at the library when an officer is interacting with them. So that's a situation I take to my classroom. I say, hey, let's reenact what I saw at the library. All right. I've gone to meetings with librarians to talk about the situations, that the concerns that they have in regards to working with the kids. I've talked to the kids. All right. So if we take, and again, I don't know what the data says pertaining what are the top 5 situations, but that might be a place to start in regards to reenacting some of those kinds of moments and using them as catalysts for discussion, whether the meeting is on Zoom, the meeting is in the neighborhood church, the meeting is in the PTO, next PTO session, it's at the high school board meeting. You know, it's a meeting that takes place after Sankofa just finished. All right. You've got, so that's all. I'm just sharing. It was a discussion that we had a couple of days ago with the scholars. Those are some things that we were talking about that came out from those guys. So,
Mr. McIntyre, first of all, good evening. I say good evening to everybody else. I don't believe that we've actually met face to face, but I certainly look forward to that day. Here's a couple of things I want to tell you, and it's probably somewhat serendipitous that you mentioned the community church situation. We have already in the can, and I will give you my personal promise on behalf of everybody on the command staff that you see on this call. We can put that together like yesterday. I have simulation exercises for traffic stops, for being just stopped on the road, on the street. We can do that very, very easily. We have one that we've done, and we did it. The reason why I said it's serendipitous at the church, because we did it in a community meeting at a church. It was a traffic stop, and we had 4 African-American male officers who were simulating being in a car. And what we did was we gave one community person a certain set of facts as it related to what you could or could not do. And then we gave another community person that same set of facts as to what you can or cannot do. The second person we excused from the room, and this is a quick snapshot of how the simulation works. We excuse that person. And then we give 2 completely different reactions from the 4 people in the car. So the first set of reactions, as you can imagine, are resistant, are difficult, are aggravating. And then what happens is the individual who is playing the role of the police officer gets an opportunity to see, now I have all of these different options available to me, the sliding scale and the spectrum of how communication brings certain responses. And then we bring in the second person, and our responses are very, very different. And I assure you that the behavior of that community person in terms of what they can or cannot do in the context of law enforcement action, right, is extremely different. So we have those kinds of simulation exercises that we could do with you tomorrow. And I give you my word, and I think, you know, that the chief won't bite my head off about this, or either the commanders. We can put that together. If you had a group of 10, 15, 20 young people who wanted to go through that, I've got 3, 4, 5 of them in the can already that will be extremely insightful as to the importance of communicating correctly, what happens in certain outcomes, why you should do what you do, why you shouldn't do certain things. And it has been extremely successful.
And I would follow that up, Mr.
I'm sorry,
McIntyre.
my apologies for interrupting. We are now at the 10-minute mark of this conversation, and we will end at 8. Thank you.
Sorry, Melanie. I would say this, Mr. McIntyre, and I certainly am speaking outside my sphere of understanding, but I would love for the school to allow us to teach a class for credit as a elective for kids at the high school surrounding all of this. It would be so effective, so wonderful that, you would immerse, I don't know, 20 kids, 30 kids, I don't know how many kids are in a class, into this relationship building and understanding about each other. And I just find that to be, but I just don't know how to get that started. I don't know how to move that forward, but I think that would be great.
We have had tremendous conversations about the value of that, not just locally and in one class. What would happen if we did that nationally? It would change the paradigm unbelievably. And because we only have a couple of minutes, and we were at one point in time, we kind of stalled on how to go about this. I'm going to take 2 minutes and share a little, if it's all right with everybody. Please tell me if I'm talking too much here. But,
okay, so Mr. Keller, we're going to give you your 2 minutes, and then with the permission of everyone, I would like to ask Anthony, one of our students that's on the line, to just give us in about 2 minutes, what has been his thoughts on this call since he's been with us. Go ahead, Mr. Keller.
What I was going to say certainly takes a back burner to Anthony. Let's let Anthony go first. That's far more important.
Can I jump in right quick? I invited Anthony. I was talking with a couple staff members today, and I was telling him about the meeting. And Anthony's a very insightful 5th grader. Been in Shaker, family been in Shaker for a while. He immediately asked, "Can I come to the meeting?" Anthony spends a lot of time with me at school. So I just said, "Okay, Anthony." Well, by the time I got home this evening, Anthony emailed me again. "I want to come to the meeting." So Anthony, jump in. I think he's left us.
I didn't.
You there?
Yes. I'm
Okay,
here.
go ahead and talk a little bit, Anthony. What did you get out of this?
Well, what I got out of it is like.
We can barely hear you.
Huh?
We can barely hear you.
So I had said what I got out of this is that like the police, they're mostly nice and they're helpful. And I think that the police are great. They're helpful. Every time I had an encounter with the police, it always been great. Like, but it was like, I'm gonna say a couple of years ago, was riding on Lee Road, riding my bike, and I had fell. And then I think the police officer was sitting like right there by that light. And he had came over there and he gave me like this ticket thing. And it was like, he wrote my name on it. And then it had like, I don't remember what it said, but then it had like a $5 Wendy's thing on it. All my encounters has been great though.
So Anthony, in the discussion, they have offered to bring discussions like this to the school building or to teach a class. Do you think that would be a good idea?
Yes.
Okay, so can we do this, Anthony, because we're going to have future conversations where we want students to come. Can we ask you to be a S.A.M.S ambassador or a Max Scholars ambassador and encourage other young people to join the call so we can have these discussions?
Yep.
Okay, I'm counting on you now. Georgia, You said you didn't think that there was time, but you had something to contribute. I can't speak. Come on,
Hello,
George.
everybody. At this time, I will just listen, but I'll probably talk on the next one. I was just kind of enjoying the conversation, and like that I should say, I would like to be a part of what has been discussed.
That's good to hear. We're glad to have you with us.
I've been
Absolutely.
talking with Ms. Harris, and she's talked about putting, I guess what you did, the simulations, a video together. And I don't want to steal Ms. Harris's thunder, let her explain it, but she approached me about doing some role playing with the police and our students at Woodbury that we're trying to, I'm going to let her take the lead as to how we're going to go about setting that up with you, Mr. Keller and Chief DeMuth.
Yes, Mr. Hicks, thank you. You're not stealing my thunder. Thank you so much for mentioning it. I appreciate it. So yes, it is a plan to create a way, because really what it comes down to is trying to find a way in, the proper vessel into the in front of the kids. And doing it by video just seems like the most practical way to do that. So the scenarios, Mr. Keller, that you described, we'd like to act out those scenarios, but the key is to have the students take part in these videos and act out some of these things on video along with the police officers.
The simulations are designed for actually the way it works is the police become the citizens and the participants become the police. So it's all interactive. They're there from the very beginning, and they have the responsibility of being the police.
See, that's wonderful. And we just want to capture that on video so that we'll have a manageable way to like distribute and have this in front of like classroom and groups at a time. So thank you, Mr. Hicks, for mentioning that. And if that seems interesting to anyone to help work on, please reach out, just email me, because we definitely need all hands on deck for the work that we're trying to do.
Is that my man Anthony on the picture over there? Hey, Anthony. I'm gonna make the chief get you another Wendy's $5 certificate, man. Actually, it may be my $5 because I can't make the chief do anything. Yep.
Well, we are at the 2-minute mark, and I want to give our students a round of applause for showing up, because that does take bravery. And I want to give the police department and all of the members of S.A.M.S and the Max Scholars a round of applause as well, because it takes dedication and commitment to show up and have these conversations. And I challenge you all to be ambassadors and bring someone in so that we can make these more fruitful. Ms. Kim, do you have anything
Great
else?
job, Anthony.
Thank you.
No,
That's Anthony. There you go.
Yes.
yeah, just really appreciative to everyone who joined the call. And, I just want to repeat what you said, so appreciative of the students who joined. Our next conversation, we really would like to have the majority of the people on be students. So, I'm definitely going to just need assistance reaching out to students to get them involved in our next call. And that next call will be the last of the series that we have planned for. So we definitely would like to, because originally we really envisioned students being in the audience for most of these calls. So we definitely would like to end this series of conversations that way. So no, unless anyone has any other questions or comments, I think we'll be wrapping it up.
I got one small comment. Anthony, will you come visit us at the police department soon, buddy? Okay, my only comment.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.